Racism, classism, colorism, or xenophobia, or perhaps all of those. It's hard to place a label on the discrimination against Black Africans in the north of the continent, as we have seen in Tunisia. Now, that's easy to say. But what this shows is the complexity of the issue and the identity crisis of the continental north. Fairly recently, comments by Tunisian President Kais Saied has exacerbated anti-Black discrimination in the country. Now, many West African countries swooped in to repatriate their citizens from Tunisia to prevent attacks on them. On the program today, we will explore the complex history of North Africa and how it has shaped the region's cultural and ethnic identities. We'll also delve into the experiences of Black Africans living in countries like Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, and examine the various forms of discrimination they face on a daily basis. My name is Kemini Amano, and you're welcome to The Square. Joining our gathering today are Henda Chennaoui. She's coordinator of AntiFascist Front in Tunisia. She's based in Tunis. We also have David Matsanga, who is an African affairs analyst, joining us from London. And then we have Elizia Volkmann, who is a journalist, joining us from Tunis. Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to The Square.
Thank you very much.
Indeed. I want to start off with you, Elizia. What would you say is the relationship between people of Tunisian origin and people of West African origin in your country?
Well, it's not my country. I'm actually British, but I cover the whole of North Africa. And the thing that I've always felt, and it's just an outsider looking in, is right across North Africa that there's a sort of psychogeographical divide between North Africa and countries, south of the Sahara, and that North Africa tends to look northwards towards Europe, but also more to the Arabic world as well, and it's not a case of so much as kind of being above the rest of the continent. It's just where their focus and their identity gaze is fixed, and that's very much as to being the sort of economic interactions rather than looking as being part of a much larger whole. But that's just an impression. I mean, Henda, who's actually Tunisian, can talk about this from a much more personal perspective. But certainly in terms of what's been happening recently is that there's a very much a ghettoization of people from Western Sub-Saharan Africa who are living in Tunisia. There are definite sort of ghettoized enclaves. And there's a complex history of the relationship between the West Africa and between North Africa that I think Henda would be better talking about rather than myself.
I see. I want to move on to Henda now. Henda, what would you say is the relationship that has existed between people of Tunisia or people of the north and people below the Sahara, as Elizia has indicated?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, with this crisis, we realized that we never really talk about this relationship, and we never really thought about it and talk about it, despite the fact that we know that there is a lot of racism and xenophobia in Tunisia. Racism against Black people exists in Tunisia, and this is a fact. There is the recent crisis is the proof that Tunisians and the state is racist. But also, we never talked about our relationship between countries from South after the colonization, and what this culture of colonization brought to us of violence and racism and hierarchy as well in the society. Many of the laws now in Tunisia who are repressing, with what we are repressing marginalized community was written in this colonization area and with the French colonization in Tunisia. So we need, as well as Tunisians, North African, to sit down and to talk about these questions in our countries. And what is this racism coming from? Why this racism exists since centuries, and how to solve this issue, how to eradicate racism in our countries, because we need to belong to Africa as Tunisians, and because we need as well to respect everyone despite his skin color or origin or country. So for sure, after the attacks towards the sub-Saharan citizen in Tunisia, many Tunisians realize now that there is a problem and we cannot continue like that. We cannot force everyone to come back to his country just because they are Black or they are not Tunisian.
I want to move the conversation now to David, and Henda raises a critical question. Why does the discrimination exist in places like Tunisia? David, on the outside, looking at the relations between the two sides of the continent, why do you think that exists? Why do you think there is what some have called racism existing in that part of the continent?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this program. This is what I've been fighting against South Africans, xenophobia against the blacks, and yet we liberated South Africa. The relationship between Tunisia and the former capital for centuries of trans-Saharan trade. You remember from West Africa, there was what we call trans-Saharan trade, which goes to a capital city called Carthage. Tunis was called Carthage. Most of the black Southwest Africans were on that route that took a lot of goods, merchandise. We built up a relationship, a culture, intermarriages. They have been there for centuries and centuries. There has never been discrimination. Under President Habibou of Tunisia, you remember there were quite a lot of Pan-Africanism conferences. We are holding them there. I've been there to Tunisia for many years, many times. This has come from the new generation of leadership, the crop of leadership that has come up with fundamentalism, fundamental ideas of change of looking at the resources, inequality in resources, inequality in equity, in the distribution of resources, in jobs. For example, some of the complaints that the people in Tunisia give is that the men from the south are taking their jobs. They are taking the few jobs that are available. Right. And that is where friction is coming from.
But David, David, hold on for me. When did it become so? Because if I remember correctly, Libya under Muammar Gaddafi was one of the countries that was championing Pan-Africanism. Tunisia, on the other hand, was one of those places that passed Law 50, which is an anti-discrimination law also. And so for me, it confuses me as to when that relationship began to sour. What would you say, David?
It soured after the death of the Pan-Africanism themselves. President Habibou was a Pan-African. President Habibou could give Africa anything and remain with nothing. Everything for Africa. And he wanted Africa to be a united, and unlike Morocco, Tunisia remained linked to Africa, to the rest of Africa. Forget about what happens in Rabat, Casablanca, and other places of Morocco. Tunisia has been linked with us. We have a lot of ties with the Black South.
Indeed.
This has been brought about by the type of social movement, social changes, employment, unemployment rates that have grown, soured, fanatism. Some of the people have just become fanatics. When they look at other people, for example, in Libya, the black guys who were looking to cross over to Mediterranean Sea,
Right.
were slaughtered.
Indeed.
Were slaughtered in boats.
David, I'm going to come back to you, but I just want to pick Elizia's thoughts on the same subject of when the relationship perhaps began to sour. Elizia, what do you think?
I think David raises a very important point, because what we're seeing with the current regime is a form of fanaticism, and it's becoming more sort of ideological, sort of day by day. I mean, people are getting messages on their SMS saying Ramadan is for for prayer and diligence, not monopolies, laziness. This kind of almost like North Korean-like statements. There has been for the last 2 years a push by a nationalist party. It's quite a small party. It was only founded back in 2018, but they've been really infiltrating social media and creating these tropes of directing people's frustrations towards, black people. Basically, sort of, they have had quite a clear policy that they want to clear black people out of Tunisia. And they've been really stoking things for some time. So they're really exploiting the economic privations and hardships and genuine, kind of unhappiness of Tunisians, for their own benefit in a real sort of polemic of hate. And Kais Saied, rather than taking on the Nationalist Party, has actually adopted their narrative, pretty much word for word. It's what he said is pretty much a paraphrasing of a statement released by the Nationalist Party in January. So there's certainly that. And then underneath, very much like the continental Europe, unfortunately, Tunisia has a history as a slave trading nation, and this goes back centuries. And sadly, like the British transatlantic slave trade was formed from a hostile takeover of the Arabic slave trade. So there are these structural roots to racism that are equivalent with Britain and France and Belgium and other colonial nations that exist. So that's something that's still deep, and the Law 50 has been one step towards trying to unpick those kind of cultural roots of racism. But in terms of recent times, David's absolutely on the money. It's racist, nationalist politicians stoking people's misery into hatred, and with tragic consequences, as we've seen.
Very well. Henda, why do you think that Law 50 has become ineffective as expected that it would have been? Why do you think that Law 50 hasn't been as effective as envisaged?
Yeah, actually, every step towards democracy that Tunisia have taken the last 10 years was stopped by the putsch in the 25th of July 2 years ago. So not only this law, but the old constitution and many other laws also were stopped directly when Kais Saied closed the parliament and said that a new regime has started and a new political system or path is taken on in Tunisia. But I still believe that this law was a good step towards fighting against discrimination against black people in Tunisia, but it was not enough. It was not enough. It's Tunisia suffers from a lot of discrimination. Tunisians as well, not only sub-Saharians, but there is no justice for marginalized people, for migrants in general, and for black people in a specific way, especially women and kids. So it's sure that this nationalist and fascist discourse that the Kais Saied held or the other political party the National Party is doing now is dangerous and lead us to this crisis. But it's not only that. We have to say it and we have to think about it, and we have to fight against every single discrimination that Tunisia is
Henda, what
doing now.
would it
The
take?
state and the police and justice as well are doing now against sub-Saharians and migrants in general, and especially women and kids who are waiting.
Here's what I want to find out, Henda. What will it take for Law 50 to be effective in Tunisia?
Yeah, the political decision, actually. Every law in Tunisia is not effective if there is not a political decision to make it effective. So the situation now is that the state doesn't want to get this law effective in Tunisia. They are making the situation, the security situation and economic situation in Tunisia very, very bad for sub-Saharan migrants, and they are forcing them to leave the country. So you have a lot of people who are leaving the country through boats in a very dangerous way to Europe, and many, we are hearing like every day, people are making their lives in danger, and there is also people who disappeared in sea, and others who are waiting in front of their embassies to fly back to their countries. So they are forcing people to leave our Tunisia, and that's why they will not take any measure to protect sub-Saharians in Tunisia. Although they are saying every day in their official discourse that they are respecting the law and are doing their best to protect them, but it's not true.
I see. David, I come to you now. I think one of the things that I have seen people struggle do is to put a label on exactly what's happening. What is happening over there? What labels suits what's happening between people in West Africa and people in North Africa? Is it racism? Is it classism? Is it xenophobia? What exactly is it? David, you're muted.
It is a catalog of all those. In fact, it is not one single approach. It's a catalog of racism, a class struggle, xenophobia, hatred, and there is this new word that we have invented, which is an-African. This word is called migrant. Migrant. This is something that has come from the British slave traders who use the same route. They call us migrants. You know, when you arrive at the shores of Europe, you are called a migrant. So someone has picked this thing, migrant, from the European across the Mediterranean Sea, brought it here to Tunisia. But let me tell my sisters, the two sisters there, that what has what has broken down in Tunisia is the question of rule of law. It's the question of democracy. Dispensation of the democracy has collapsed. The guy in Tunisia has actually destroyed every type of rule of law. I mean, he has taken over the parliament. He has closed the parliament. He rules by the army, which we know very well as a political scientist. You can't rule Tunisia without the army. That's one I know for a long time.
So I want us to come back to the issue. Can we, I mean, as Africans, can we call what is happening in North Africa racism without admitting our own perspective on the issue, in that it would seem then that the rest of Africa also does not see those in the north as being Africans. Henda, is that what you see?
No.
Right.
No, we cannot compare.
No. The rest,
David, I'm going to come back to you in a bit. David, I'll come back to you in a bit. I want to hear from Henda. Do you feel that the rest of Africa considers those in the north of Africa as being Africans?
I had a lot of discussions, long discussions with a lot of other activists from many other countries in Africa. And yeah, it seems that we as North African are not considered as African or Black African. And I think that the right way to describe ourselves is North African, and I respect that. And we cannot compare racism to this question, because there is a domination relationship, and our history of slavery and discrimination against Black African forbid us to say that there is a kind of reciprocity maybe in this issue. So yeah, we are North African, and the Tunisians here in Tunisia, they feel more Arab, and they feel more Amazigh maybe, or maybe North African, and they never, or a few of times they said that we are African. So there is a history, and we have to talk about it. We have to think about it. But I think that no comparison here, because as I said, there is this domination in power relationship that forbid us to do any comparison between the two situations.
I see. David, I'm coming back to you. I know you wanted to take a dig at the question, but you know, the point I'm trying to make is that it's not only a North African identity crisis, but also a thing of those of us below the Sahara, not exactly placing those in the North as part of Africans, perhaps for their skin color. So we are also as guilty as perhaps they are, David.
No. To the contrary, for us, it is them who have actually isolated themselves. And you see, the founding fathers of these nations, Algeria, Berbera, Bourguiba of Tunisia, Muammar Gaddafi, King Idris, Gabriel Nasser, I am now naming for you the king of Morocco, not the son, the father. These are people they were the founding members of African Union. They even contributed more to the liberation of the Black South. They never had this notion of the Black South, this Black Africa. They had one Africa. Gabriel Nasser, Berbera, Bourguiba, King Hassan of Morocco himself, he never believed in a Black Africa. He believed in one Africa. The new generation that has come in, right from the Horn of Africa, the Somalis, they don't look at Africa as their nation. Djibouti, Eritrea, as we go up the north, they look at the Gulf states in Arabia as their brothers more than us. The South has never discriminated the North. The North has worked with the South. Egypt works with us. We are united by cultures of River Nile. We are united by cultures of the trans-Saharan slave trade that took place. So we cannot discriminate them. But
I see. I want to hear Elizia's view. And Elizia, I hope that's this.
Let me finish one point.
Quickly.
The point that has come here is when these brothers of ours and sisters in Tunisia fly to Paris, fly to Italy, then they come back, they think we are not part of them. Even one of the countries in North Africa has applied to become a member of European Union and the North African Union. So we have never discriminated them. They just now want
but you see, I think that I'll come back to you, David, but I want to hear Elizia's thoughts. And Elizia, I hope that this bit of the conversation does not bring you any discomfort. But looking on the outside, you're on the outside looking on the inside. It is not just a North African problem, is it? It's not only the North Africans who are guilty of alienating themselves from the rest of the continent. It would seem those at the bottom of the Sahara have done same to them. What would you say?
I mean, I've not worked so much in West Africa or south of the Sahara, so it's a bit hard to comment. I think there has been a process of isolation in North Africa with quite sort of hardline regimes that are very much with a sort of veering towards Arab nationalism, that kind of looking also towards the Gulf. I would say, having worked in Morocco, they have a much more dynamic relationship with the rest of Africa. And there's a lot more trade, and there's a lot more acknowledgement that Morocco is part of the whole African economic landscape. I think one thing that's rather telling here is that this is a Nigerian TV program talking about Tunisia, but I really don't see that much coverage of the rest of Africa in the Tunisian press. So in terms of the press, they're not looking outward towards other, brother and sister African nations. If they are reporting on international issues, it tends to be America or the Gulf or Europe, and that's the direction of their gaze, and where culturally people are placing, their importance in terms of editorial. But the sad irony is that the name Africa comes from Ifriqiya, which was a name that Tunisia was Ifriqiya. So that does point to older relationships that are much more Pan-African and more embracing of being part of a bigger continent than before.
Very well.
But also that there's a push down from Europe as well, and this is really, really disturbing. What's the pressure that Italy is applying, and you've got this building of a very toxic relationship between Kais Saied, who is using I hate the term migrant crisis. I'm really with David. People who black people here, they don't call themselves migrants. They say we'd rather be called shasha seekers. They're looking for opportunities for a better life, looking for education, looking for a future. Mm-hmm. The sort of push down, this fear of economic collapse in Tunisia, and the sort of weird sort of toxic economic bargaining that's now going on is really worrying. And I don't think it's good news for black people in Tunisia or people who are looking to travel to Europe either.
I see. Henda, how much of this identity crisis do you think that international organizations have contributed to? Because, until those classifications of sub-Saharan Africa by these organizations, it would appear that it was just one big Africa. So, Henda, I want to hear your thoughts on what role do you think that these organizations have played? And perhaps it's a time to throw away those classifications.
Actually, we, as activists and journalists, and also researcher in sociology, and as also coordinator in this anti-fascist front, I think that our approach is a human rights approach more than a cultural identity approach. We want a Tunisia that respects all rights for everyone. We want a Tunisia who is open to everyone, who respects everyone's right and everyone's identity and culture. We want an independent justice for everyone. We want a police who respects human rights and women's rights and everyone's rights. We want a president that is respectful, that held a speech away from conspiracy theories and this atmosphere of fear and hate and this racist speech. We want racism to be end in Tunisia and everywhere in the world. And this is despite our cultural and identity crisis. This has nothing to do with what we think about ourselves. We can be in in Europe, in North Africa, or in Europe or in Asia. We have to respect everyone's rights in our land, and we have to protect minorities. We have to protect marginalized people in our country. For me, this is the approach that we have to take very urgently, and we have to work on it very urgently in Tunisia, especially that the crisis is not ended yet, and we have a lot of sub-Saharan citizens in South Rhine to get to Europe. But anyway, or others who are waiting to go back to their countries. And this is not the solution, because we know that migration will never end. So we have to deal with migration. We have to accept it. We have to think about economy with the migration. We have to think about our political systems and strategies within the migration elements.
I see. We'll talk about some solutions in a bit. We have a few more minutes to go, and I'm hoping that we can cover as much as we can in those minutes. But David, I saw you nod into the question earlier about whether or not these international classifications should be done away with, as part of efforts to find a uniform identity for the entire continent.
We have been classified. My sisters, we have been classified. Sub-Saharan Africa, Equatorial Africa. We were brought up. Somebody came and said, I discovered Africa. Dr. Livingstone came and said, I found Africa. I found River Nile. We existed before. But now for the Western Empire, hemisphere, to start studying us as guinea pigs. We are being classified. Everything what is wrong is put in sub-Saharan Africa, south of Sahara, Equatorial Africa, North Africa. Divide and rule systems were brought in by the colonial masters, the French, the British, the Portuguese, Spaniards. Look at the war in Western Sahara. The divide between Morocco. These are the terms that you are right, we should do away with. We are one Africa. We are one African Union.
What would it take? What would it take to do away with that?
We just refuse them. We refuse the tags. We ourselves carry the tags. You find a Nigerian telling himself, I come from ECOWAS area. No, you come from Africa. I, Dr. Matsanga, some of you think that I even come from Kenya. Some of you think I come from Zimbabwe. The way you have seen me defending Kenya, Zimbabwe. But I'm a Ugandan. Nobody even goes said, oh, you are Ugandan. That is the spirit of Pan-Africanism we want. If I find a Tunisian in London being beaten by any person in London, I will join the fight. And we fight. I don't care where you have come from in Africa. So we should do away with these specialized zones of economic importance. Sub-Saharan Africa has got minerals. The Equatorial has got trees, timber, and other minerals that you can take away, platinum, gold, diamonds. This was classification by our colonial masters. We still have colonial vestiges.
Very well.
Let's get it very clear. That are still standing here today in the African continent. That's why you see the trouble coming up from South Africa. In fact, I'm shocked that the trouble is coming from North Africa and another trouble is coming from South Africa.
I see. David, I want to move on. I want to move on with the conversation now, and I'll move on to Elizia. Elizia, what do you think, the continents can do so that things like this do not continue to happen? When Africans move to other places, they are not other places on the continent. They are not especially referred to as migrants as though they have moved on to another continent. What should Africans be looking at?
I mean, language is really important. Also, issues about connectivity and about visas, because one of the things that's a real disconnect within Africa is the lack of freedom of movement. I mean, there is the African Union. I'm surprised that the African Union hasn't pushed to make the whole of Africa a visa-free zone where people can travel freely and therefore feel more connected, for one thing. I think there's a real need for African states to come together so that they are more unified culturally, economically, that together, that they are a diplomatic and lobbying force, because what we still have is a huge amount of exploitation of African natural resources, and still huge plundering of Africa. I mean, but under this this artificially created image of Africans being poor. I mean, the richest empire that ever was, the richest man who ever lived, was Mansa Musa of the Malian Empire. You know, there's a real need for a quantum shift in terms of identity and projection outward, but also the rest of the world needs to be listening and to not be exploiting and raiding Africa for the gold, for the cadmium, for all the sort of precious metals, gas. I mean, Africa is now the alternative to Russia as a supply of energy.
Absolutely.
But I see Europe looking, sort of almost looking at Africa as a sort of kind of a big fridge of stores of, goodies that it needs, rather than negotiating on a more equitable and respectful basis.
I see. And I want to ask you two questions in one, if that's okay. First, I want to learn from you. What would it take? How can we ensure that not only people from sub-Saharan Africa, but also Black Tunisians are treated right in Tunisia? And what do North Africans, like Tunisians, expect of the rest of the continent in our bid to have that unified or uniform identity?
Well, that's
once again, I'm not sure that we can.
Elizia, that's for Henda. I'm sorry.
All right.
Yeah, sorry. So once again, I'm not sure if the solution for our problems is to have one unique identity. We can have different identities. We can be diverse. We can have different histories. It's not that the problem. I think that what we have to do as Tunisians now is to step back and think about our history, our relationship between Tunisia and other countries, the racism and roots of racism in our countries, and power relationship between Black people and white people in our country. With this decolonial also approach that can help us to understand what happened during the occupation in Tunisia and other African countries, how to progress, how to go back to our maybe a real alive, if I can say, because Tunisia is still, since the independence and until now, is still looking for European allies, but it's not working. It's not working since years, since the independence is not working. So maybe Tunisians has to look in the continent to find good and real allies for economy, and not only economy, also culture and education and so on. So yeah, we really need to do all of this. But once again, we need a political decision, a clear political decision that says, okay, now we are going through a new path, and we will decolonize our countries, our Tunisia, from this Western policies and the view for this Western policy against migration, for example, and to discuss with a new approach that make us more human, also more African, more open to people that look like us and has the same or have the same interest.
So Henda, like just to clarify my confusion. As a country, does Tunisia feel more Arab or African? Because I think that's where the identity issue comes from. And I understand what you're saying, that we should all accept that we all have different histories. We get that. But what we are trying to deal with is whether or not the North feels African enough to accept the rest of Black Africa, Or even if, you know, Black Africa feels the North is African enough to accept people who are lighter skinned, who are Africans. That's what we are trying to get at. And so, you know, countrywide, do you think that that conversation has been had? How do people from Tunisia feel about their African identity?
Yeah, as I said, people in Tunisia, they define themselves first as Arab and Muslim, and then as North African, and maybe then as African. We have this Arab-Muslim identity very strong in Tunisia, saying that we are Tunisians, we are from the Maghreb. It means the North African countries. We belong to the Arab world. All of this, yeah, you know, it's not a coincidence. It's also a history of a political discourse that has been very strongly going in this way of the Pana-Arabism, Islam identity. The religion is very important. The language, the Arabic, is really related to the religion, so it's really, really important. We didn't really, as Tunisians, we didn't really respect the minorities, who are not minorities, but minorities towards the power.
I mean, if
power, as the Amazigh, for example. The Amazigh is not teach in the schools.
Okay, I'm afraid we'd have to end our program now. I know there's a lot to cover, but we've run out of time. I hope that we can pick this conversation again at a later time. Thank you so much, Elizia, Henda, and David, for your time and insight on the subject matter here on the program. Thank you so much. That'll be all for today. I hope that you learned a thing or two. Some other time we will pick up this conversation again and really settle it up on, you know, I mean, Africa is not synonymous to Black people. That's where we should get. And your skin color should not be, you know, a reason for discrimination whatsoever. My name is Kemini Amano. I'll see you some other time. Bye-bye.